Thank you. Hello and good evening. I'd like to thank Mr. Bay for making this possible and for the invitation. Thank you. And I'd also like to start with thanking Honorable Councillor Lee for his kindness while I was here. He has made sure I enjoyed my stay here in Korea and has definitely been a very good guide. Thank you very much. I will try to keep the life of Misa, our translator, simple, so I'll try and speak at a moderate speed, although I know she's she understands me very well, but if I do speak fast, which I tend to do sometimes, please throw something at me, okay? Good, and lastly, I think one of the most important people in Korea, which is Mr. Im, who is the person that imports the Maltese beer Chisk, which we love very much. So greetings from up here. Good. Well, I'm here to discuss the DLT regulation in Malta, and in the first instance, I'd like to explain, maybe for those who are not following the developments in the regulatory side of especially cryptocurrency, but blockchain generally, that Malta, the reason why Malta is considered the crypto island of the world, ultimately, is because it's trying to come out with a regulatory framework which it expects will be implemented throughout the world in the next, say, 20 years. And contrary to other countries, Malta is treating blockchain crypto assets as if they were funds, as if they were securities. But it goes further than other countries such as Singapore and other European countries who are mainly concerned about anti-money laundering. Malta has gone further, and as we will see, they are really trying to regulate as much as possible. Now, many in Malta have criticized this move by saying, why are you making life a bit more difficult than the competition of Malta? Many exchanges, ICOs are happening in Singapore, in Switzerland, and as you may well see now with this presentation, Malta has introduced more requirements than these jurisdictions. But we've seen now that we have seen the vision of the government and after having criticized the government for this move, we've seen there was the need for this. Because now we can see that actually the European Union are looking at Malta as a possible future directive for the European Union. So the same regulations would be implemented throughout the EU. And that was the aim of the government of Malta to, if you want to say, practice what you preach, to be an example for European standards.
네, 그러면 이제 몰타가 지금 크립토 섬이라고 불리잖아요. 그 부분에 대해서 잘 모르시는 분들도 있으실 것 같아서 잠시 설명을 드리겠습니다. 네, 몰타에서는 DLT 규제 쪽을 진행을 하고 있는데요. 사실 다른 국가와는 다르게 저희 몰타 같은 경우 블록체인이나 크립토커런시를 뭔가 펀드나 금융상품처럼 바라보고 있습니다. 싱가포르나 또 다른 스위스랜드와 같은 국가는 자금 세탁에 조금 더 운영하는 경향이 있는데요. 저희는 조금 다른 시각으로 보고 있습니다. 하지만 지금 이제 몰타가 이제 규제를 조금 더 강화를 하고 있는데 처음에는 왜 이렇게 더 어렵게 만드냐, 일을 어렵게 만드냐라고 불평불만을 했지만 사실 이제 그 정부의 비전을 저희가 이제 깨닫고 있고 여기에 대한 규제에 대한 필요성이 있다는 것을 저희가 깨닫고 있습니다. 그래서 이제 EU에서도 이 몰타가 어떠한 이제 유럽의 스탠다드가 되는 식으로 저희의 목표가 그렇게 정해졌습니다.
Now, just to give us a summary before we get into the detail, I believe that it's good to understand that in Malta, the whole regulatory framework is being regulated. The whole framework under which the ICO will happen is being regulated. Meaning, if you are to launch an ICO in Malta, all your service providers have to be licensed and regulated. Therefore, at the moment, if you are to launch an ICO in Malta, then given Malta is currently the only country that is fully regulating the service provider, then all service providers have to be regulated. Well, what it means is that the exchange you're going to use will have to be licensed under the Maltese authority, and it will be controlled, meaning that it will be possible to actually go in and check what's going on if something had to happen. It means that the ICO, the issuer of the currency, of the crypto asset, will have to have what's called a VFA agent in some cases, where this agent will have to check that the company issuing the crypto asset is actually following the law by the letter. So there is direct control, similar to, say, almost a bank, similar to a fund. So that's just to give the background of what Malta is trying to achieve, as comparable maybe to other countries where the only requirement is that you need to follow the money laundering regulations, and that's the main requirement, and some simple checks. So Malta is going much more, is going much further than this. But then to conclude on this point, I believe that is what the investors that are going to be purchasing the virtual assets, that's what they want. They want security. And if you think of all the scandals there have been with crypto assets, most of them would have been avoided if this type of regulatory framework had existed in the first place. So it's looking at this at what the investors want to see. They want a stamp of approval of a European government saying, we are controlling this investment. We are controlling this as if it is a collective investment vehicle, rather than a coin which no one controls. So there is this need for security, which is Malta's trying to grant to the ICOs that decide to choose Malta as the issuing country.
요약을 하자면 이제 몰타에서는 전반적인 이 블록체인이나 크립토커런시 규제 체계가 규제가 되어 있습니다. 그래서 몰타에서 만약에 ICO를 이제 추진하신다고 하시면 이 서비스 프로바이더가 모두가 이제 라이선스를 가지고 있어야 되고, 또 이 프로바이더가 이제 규제의 대상이 되거든요. 그래서 지금 몰타가 유일하게 이러한 그 크립토커런시에 대한 규제를 하는 국가입니다. 그래서 이제 거래소가 모두가 이제 라이선스를 가져야 되고, 또 이제 통제를 받게 되는 것이죠. 그래서 ICO 발행 기관들을 보면 거기에는 그 VFA 에이전트라는 것이 필요합니다. 그래서 VFA 에이전트라는 것은 그 발행 기관이 발행하는 회사가 정말 법을 잘 준수하고 있는지 확인하는 역할이죠. 그래서 직접 이런 어떤 통제를 가한다고 이제 보시면 되고요. 그래서 이제 크립토커런시를 저희는 펀드나 어떻게 보면 또 은행과 같이 저희가 다루고 있다는 것을 확인하실 수 있을 것입니다. 아까도 말씀드렸다시피 다른 국가 같은 경우는 자금 세탁 방지법 이런 부분에만 집중을 해서 준수를 하고 있는데 몰타는 더 나아가 전반적인 규제를 하는 것입니다. 그리고 저희가 생각하기에는 이것이 단순히 이제 필요한 것이, 그러니까 저희가 생각했을 때 필요한 것이 아니라 투자자들이 정말 원하는 것이라고 생각을 해요. 그래서 이제 투자자들이 정말 보안이나 이제 자신의 자산에 대한 그러한 보안을 원하고 어떤 기준을 원하기 때문에 이런 트렌드로 저희가 나아가고 있습니다.
Good. Well, so I'm Ivan. Just to start a bit about myself, and I've been with Sheltons for about 12 years. I spent 8 years, well, even more, in Denmark because we have offices in Denmark, London, Australia, Sydney, and in Malta. And I've been in Denmark for 8 years. I'm Maltese. I originally started studying accounting, then I studied law and Danish tax law, and then I did after Denmark I did a master's in international tax from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, and nowadays I head the office in Malta. Where we have a very good team of international people, and we work exclusively with international clients. So we work with helping international clients invest in Malta, and that's what we do. We hardly have any. We have very few purely Maltese businesses, so we're very focused on international clients. We are going to be, I'm going to do a very, very brief introduction on Sheltons, but not more than that. We're going to speak briefly about Malta. I won't repeat the Honourable Council said earlier, but I'll do a brief introduction. I wanted to explain the tax system of Malta because many people get confused with the tax system. With the refund system and how it actually functions. And then we're going to discuss the regulatory framework, and the idea was to try and give a couple of examples here today just to show how this would work. And I will warn you, they are just very, very simple examples because each situation needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and there is no way that there is a one-size-fits-all situation. But we've chosen two examples, one for an ICO and one for an exchange, just to give you a bit of flavor. And now we'll go to some concluding remarks.
네, 그래서 오늘 제가 말씀드릴 부분은요, 많은 분들이 조금 헷갈려하시는 부분인 법인세에 대해서 말씀을 드리고요, 환급 시스템에 대해서도 잠시 말씀을 드릴 겁니다. 그리고 이제 가상금융자산법 규제에 대해서 말씀을 드리고요, 두 가지 예를 들었는데 먼저 말씀드리기 조금 심플하게 제가 준비를 했습니다. 그래서 ICO랑 또 이제 거래소 관련해서 예시를 두 가지 들도록 하겠습니다.
As I already mentioned, we do have offices in Copenhagen and Sydney and London, and we're now planning an office in New York, which is just in its infancy, but we're hoping that it will pick up soon. We do work exclusively with international investors, helping people in and out of the countries where we operate. We've been around since 1995. And we're not associated with any firm, so we can work with anyone. If a client wants to work with PwC, we don't have any conflicts of working with them or with any of the big four firms. We work with everyone basically in Malta and have done so in all the countries where we operate. These are some of the services that we can assist with. Here in Korea, we're lucky to have someone like Mr. Bae who can help bridging the gap between the two countries and where we can cooperate with him. But these are some of the services we can offer in Malta, which includes legal services, advice on tax, which international tax, which is where we specialize as a firm. We also provide courses on international tax. If anyone wants to have a look at our website and wants to join one of the courses, you're more than welcome, and then you get to look, to hear me speak for a week or so. We do advisory work on the money laundering directive, on the virtual financial assets regulations. We do the company setup. We provide bank accounts. I help with opening bank accounts and provide also directors where needed. You'll see it's one of the requirements on the BFA regulations, and that is something that we can do. Malta, being a member in the EU since 2004, we've adopted the euro. So, something here. We've adopted the euro, and we have no exchange controls, so money can flow in and out without any complexity. There are one of the complaints we get in Malta is that there aren't many international banks. However, we do have a large number of banks. The banking industry is quite big, but not many of the international banks actually are in Malta. HSBC is probably one of the biggest international banks in Malta. Bank of Valletta, which is from our capital city, is actually larger in size of corporate. The corporate banking is larger than HSBC, but still it's not an international bank. There are, Sparkasse, which is affiliated with Erste Bank in Austria. There are some other international banks, but otherwise the banks that there are pretty local. Having said that, we do work with banks externally, including in the UK, if needed, but Hong Kong, Singapore, that doesn't typically create issues when it comes to banking. I'm focusing on banking because I'm sure, as you will know, when it comes to these crypto assets, that's the biggest concern. Everyone will the first hurdle you need to get over with. Good. So.
Can I interpret? 네. 실전에 대해서 잠시 말씀드리겠습니다. 저희는 이제 코펜하겐, 시드니, 몰타, 런던 이런 같은 곳에 사업소를 두고 있고요. 이제 주로 국제 기업을 상대로 다양한 사업을 벌이고 있습니다. 그래서 저희 서비스를 잠시 설명을 해드리면 계약서나 법정 문서 그리고 조세 관련해서 많은 이제 자문 서비스를 드리고 있고요. 그리고 자금 세탁이나 BFA 의무에 관해서도 많은 자문을 드리고 있습니다. 또 몰타에 대해서도 잠시 설명을 해주셨는데 2004년에 유로의 회원국이 되었고요. 2008년에 유로를 공식 화폐로 쓰게 되었습니다. 두 개의 큰 은행들이 있습니다. 그래서 보시면 HSBC, BOB와 같은 은행들이 있는데요. 사실 현재 은행들도 이보다 더 큰 은행들이 있기는 하지만 HSBC가 국제 은행이라서 저는 적어놨습니다.
One of the differences from offshore companies, Malta being part of the European Union, we have to file audited accounts on an annual basis, and you need to submit a tax return. Even if you don't have tax to pay, you still have to submit the tax return. You still have to do audited financial statements, and they are public information, so they get submitted to a central register, and they are visible to anyone who wants to go have a look. The company we use mostly is the LTD. We follow the UK legal forms, so limited. It's a company limited by shares, essentially very similar to the UK LTD, the German GmbH, and so on. So it's we also have trusts coming from a common law background. Malta having been a colony of the UK, we follow common law. We have trust law. However, we also have foundations, which is something that stems more out of civil law tradition. So that's also quite interesting. So in terms of legal forms, we're able to structure with whatever form that anyone would like to use. There's really very little limitations with what we can do. So the country is quite small in the sense that it's easy to get to meet with government officials. It's easy to get to discuss with them. Of course, it's not just to meet. The point is if there's a need to discuss, it's the country is relatively small. There's, if you're in the island, you're able to go to anyone within 15 minutes. Everyone is from each other. So it does give its advantages. It does help, especially in an industry like this where it's all new. It's all you're gonna have many questions. The regulator, which is the Malta Financial Services Authority, it's easy to speak to them. You can call them and ask questions and find a solution when the problem arises, and that's very important. I believe when it comes to this kind of crypto assets, when the whole technology is new. And company formation, we can do it very fast. It's all digitally. You need a minimum of one shareholder for a single member company and one director. The one director is if it falls under VFA rules, we will see you actually need two, but that's the regulatory side. Okay? There's no need of a local shareholder. You can have 100% owned by a Korean company, for example, and the director could be in Korea. There is no requirement in Malta for the director to be there. Of course, there could be concerns from a Korean side, but that's a different story. But from a Maltese perspective, there is no concern. There's no issue there. Minimum share capital is of 1,165, and only 20% has to be paid up, meaning the actual cash outlay is around 240 euros. There's a register of directors, which you can access online, and anyone can access it. A register of shareholders, which anyone can access. There's also a register of the beneficial owners of the company, which is what we call quasi public, meaning that the information about the beneficial owner is not accessible to the public online, but it's accessible to all licensed entities in Malta. So it is accessible to all the lawyers, all the accountants, all the VFA agents, so we don't say it's not public, it's actually public, because there are many people who can actually access it. All of this is transparent, and you're able to access it. The general public is able to access it, and it's all about transparency and not having anything hidden.
몰타에 대해서 잠시 말씀을 드리면 이제 유한책임 회사의 형태가 가장 많고요. 그리고 또 가장 큰 장점이라고 하면 이 정보 규제기관과 잘 소통을 할 수 있습니다. 특히나 이렇게 블록체인과 같은 새로운 기술이나 산업에 대해서는 질문이 많기 때문에 이것이 굉장히 좋은 영향을 줄 수 있겠죠. 그리고 다음 슬라이드에 보시면 굉장히 빠르게 기업을 설립을 할 수 있습니다. 그래서 한 명의 주주, 한 명의 대표장은 있으면 되고요. 편집 같은 언어가 필요가 없습니다. 그래서 대표가 한국에 있어도 되는 경우입니다. 그리고 이제 모든 것들이 이제 정보가 투명하게 공개되는 것을 중요하게 생각을 하고 있습니다.
In terms of the corporate side, we're going to switch to the explanation of the tax. I was wondering if someone had any question on more the corporate side. We haven't spoken yet about the regulatory side of crypto assets. If there was any question, yes. Hi.
Most favorite form of incorporation for ICO is a non-profit foundation. What is the Maltese law regarding non-profit foundation?
So in Malta, from a corporate perspective, you are able to have a not-for-profit foundation. The structuring, would it be okay if we discuss it when we discuss the structure of the ICO that we have as an example later? Because I'm going to answer your question. Is that okay?
네, 나중에 동일한 질문이 나오기 때문에 거기에 대해서 추가적으로 설명을 드리도록 하겠습니다.
That's Valletta in the background, and that's the harbor of Valletta. As you can see, you know, I've done something wrong here. It's a natural harbor where, you know, so in the old days you can imagine in the center of the Mediterranean, and a harbor like that was very attractive for any navy that wanted to keep its ships well sheltered from the rough seas of the Mediterranean. So, some tax principles. So, Malta has the lowest, what we call effective tax rate in the European Union. The tax rate is 35%. However, as we will see, when the investment comes from non-Maltese investors, there is what's called an imputation refund. If anyone has worked with Australia or with the UK before in the 80s, that they had the same system, but the government then gives a refund to the foreign shareholder, and we're going to explain that. So that's the 5%, and then there is a European VAT number, which is very useful when you're coming in from outside the EU. There is no transfer pricing legislation. Does not mean that there are no anti-avoidance legislation that mimic the effect of transfer pricing, but there are no transfer pricing legislation, meaning you don't need transfer pricing documentation in principle unless you are asked. CFC regulations, there are none, no withholding taxes on dividends, and there are no tin capitalization rules in terms of interest. These are the rules that would limit the deductibility of interest when you have loans. So that's and then there are the notional deduction, notional interest deduction rules, which is because shareholders are able to grant loans interest-free, there is the option to actually claim deemed interest deduction, but that's something separately. You benefit from. Sorry.
네, 그래서 이제 몰타의 그 법인세에 대해서 말씀드리면요, EU에서 굉장히 낮은 실효세율을 말씀드립니다. 실제로 법인세율은 35%이지만 저희가 임퓨테이션 리펀드라는 것을 가지고 있거든요. 즉 주주 귀속 크레딧이라고 해서 다시 그 주주들에게 돈을 리펀드를 해주는 것입니다. 그래서 이제 실질적인 실효세율이 5%고요. EU VAT 번호를 사용하고 있고요. 그래서 이전 가격 법이 저희가 갖고 있지 않아서 이전을 위해서 이제 따로 문서를 준비를 하거나 할 필요가 없습니다. 그리고 CFC 규칙도 없고요. 배당 이자 로열티에 대한 원천 징수세도 없습니다. 그리고 이자 공제에 대한 규칙도 없습니다. 개념적으로는 이자 공제 규칙이 있긴 하지만 이것은 선택적입니다.
I just wanted to say there are no capital gains on the sale of any shares. So throughout the structure, if there is a sale, there are no Maltese capital gains. Of course, there could be capital gains in other countries, but none in Malta. You can see here in the diagram where the operating company. So there's the operating company. The bottom pays the tax to the tax office, which is the 35%, and pays a dividend out of 100 of profit. Out of 100 profit, pays a dividend of 65. The authorities in Malta, upon receipt of the dividends, would receive a refund. And you might think, why would Malta do this? It's not about the corporate tax rate of Malta. It's in order to allow the other country to tax. Because ultimately, when there is the payment of the dividends up to the shareholder, okay, there will be taxation in full in the hands of the shareholder, and therefore Malta takes the position that our share will be only 5% of the total tax of the ultimate investors. So it leaves it in the hands of the other country to tax. So it reduces the overall tax burden by accepting to lower the Maltese tax. Then, as you can see, if you pay the dividends from Malta, you pay 95 to shareholders that could be an individual in Korea, and then he pays the tax on 95, of course. Okay. Is there any questions on this? Because this is for me, it's basic, but of course it's good.
몰타의 그 세금 상급 시스템에 대해서 먼저 말씀드리겠습니다. 그래서 몰타에서 운영을 하는 기업이 이제 그 몰타에 있는 국세청에게 세금을 35%를 냅니다. 그러면 이것이 한 2달 정도 이후에 환급이 되는데 30%가 환급이 됩니다. 그래서 국세청이 이제 실제로 디비던드의 5%만 가져가는 것인데 왜 이렇게 하느냐라고 말씀을 드리면 다른 국가에서 이제 세금을 징수할 수 있도록 하는 것이죠. 그리고 기업들이 이제 조세가 너무 과도하게 부담이 되지 않도록 하기 위해서입니다. 그래서 이제 그 이익이 100이면 그 배당을 지주회사한테 65를 가게 되고, 그리고 쉐어홀더, 예를 들면은 이제 한국에 있는 주주들이 배당을 95를 받게 되면 이 95에 대해서만 이 주주들이 세금을 내면 되는 것이죠.
This is the maths, basically, that you come to the tax when someone says Malta has a effective tax rate of 5%, then that's how it comes to. These are all other taxes that can apply. There is no dividend withholding tax on any payment of dividends. It's just no withholding tax in Maltese law on anything. So there is no withholding tax on royalties, no withholding tax on interest. There are no capital gains tax, as I've said, that there are no stamp duties to foreigners. There are some exceptions, but that's mainly if you own property in Malta. That's the exceptions. Good. Do you want to do the translation for that?
그래서 짧게 보시면 다 아시겠지만 이제 자본이익에 대한 세금도 없고 또 배당금에 대한 원청 징수세도 없다는 것을 알고 계실 겁니다. 여기에는 이제 제외되는 것들이 있기는 하지만 이제 부동산이 있거나 하는 경우에는 달라지지만 대부분 이렇게 세금이 없다는 것을 확인하실 수 있겠습니다.
So now that you have a bit of an idea of the Maltese corporation law and the Maltese tax law, or these data principles that apply, now we can try and look at the regulatory framework for crypto assets. Now the framework is very new and it's still being developed. It is currently not in force, so the law is in place. The authority, so Malta has taken this very seriously. It has set up a separate authority in the government to deal with digital technology and innovation. So that's to deal with this, and it's a separate authority for itself. And that authority has issued guidelines which are still in draft form until the Minister for Innovation will announce that, okay, now we have everything in place and the law will enter into force. But the Parliament has already approved it, so it is there. Now it's simply the IT system, the employees within the authorities, the systems that are and the guidelines which are the most important that are coming into play.
그래서 저희가 이제 가상금융자산법에 대해서 말씀을 드리면 지금 의회에서 통과를 하기는 했지만 아직까지 발효가 되진 않았습니다. 그래서 IT나 고용이나 가이드라인과 같은 부분이 조금 더 완성이 되면 이제 발효가 되게 될 것입니다.
So this is a bit of the timeline. So you can see it's pretty recent. In July, the law was introduced and also the Malta Digital Innovation Authority was set up, and then as recent as the 31st of August, there has been the issuing of the guidelines, so up until end of August, there wasn't much. People were just speculating of how it would be. It's only now that actually the guidelines have come out and they're being analyzed in the final one, at least in detail. I believe there was also some changes yesterday already, which I have not had the time to study in detail. But as you can see, it's all pretty recent and it's all going very fast. The government is pushing this forward. It's the government of Malta that wants this, and as you can see, there's a commitment to deliver. I started with the transitory rules, which is now that the law is in place, but it's not in force. What happens if you do an ICO now? What happens if you have an exchange in Malta now? And this was very important, especially for the ones that had already, before the law was introduced, launched their ICO from Malta. So basically the law allows for anyone to launch an ICO as long as if you are an issuer, and this is the first A, okay, if you're an issuer, then within six months you have to submit the application. So once the law comes in force, within 6 months, then you have to submit the application. It does not mean it has to be approved. So it could be that the authority will take them a year until you're approved. But if you do it now, then you can do it, and then within 6 months you're going to have to be approved. Why is this important? Because once the law comes into force, then you have to wait for approval before you do your ICO. So there is a balance to find. Once the law comes into force, then you're going to have to wait for full approval before you can do your ICO. And that is same with what we're calling VFA services. That includes an exchange. That's a service provider, which would be the exchange. They have a bit more because, as I said, they need to be licensed. It's a much more thorough licensing requirement, and that's 12 months. And that's one of the reasons also why exchanges are coming in now, because of course they don't have to, once the law comes into force, they would not need to wait for approval. They can continue operating while they get their approval. And that's the section which says that they may continue to work until they get their approval. Now, some definitions, because I think if many are lawyers in this room, you're going to see some law on the screen. So this is the definition of DLT, digital ledger technology assets, and that is very, very wide. It includes a virtual token. It includes virtual financial assets. It includes electronic money, financial. Sorry, I didn't stop.
우선 아까 말씀드렸다시피, do you want to go on?
Yes, sir.
네, 아까 말씀드렸다시피 이제 저희가 아직까지 발효가 되지 않았기 때문에 이 부분이 이제 임시 규칙이 굉장히 중요한데요. 사실 이렇게 발효가 되지 않았기 때문에 만약에 발효가 되게 된다면 이제 완전히 백서를 등록을 하고 승인까지 받아야 됩니다. 그렇기 때문에 지금 이 상태에서는 이제 6개월 내에 이제 백서를 등록하기만 하면 되고 또 승인을 받지 않아도 되기 때문에 지금 이 상태에서 거래소가 굉장히 많이 들어오고 있는 것입니다.
So the law defines what virtual tokens are, and it excludes electronic money. It defines what financial instruments are, and those are instruments that are already, that can be by analogy, meaning compared to other financial instruments that are issued. So if you issue a crypto asset, a DLT asset, which is identical to a share in a company, it will need to be regulated under the same rules of shares, right? This is the same principle Australia has taken. Then what's left? This is what the virtual financial assets is trying to regulate. What is left are being called the virtual financial assets, and basically it excludes, is not electronic money, financial instrument, and virtual tokens. So in terms of so all tokens will ultimately be regulated, because the financial instruments are regulated either under the corporate law. If they are similar to shares, they are regulated under the funds, collective investment schemes, if they are similar to collective investment schemes. If they are not, then they will be regulated, the ones that fall between the cracks, they will be regulated under the VFA Act. Okay, and then here is that the authorities will launch the guidelines, which they have now, with how to actually do the tests. Okay, so for DLT exchanges, we make a distinction between the general term for exchanges, which covers all exchanges for any crypto asset, and VFA exchanges are those that actually accept VFA assets, and they are separated and they are regulated harsher in the big scheme of things when they accept VFA exchanges, because those are the ones that are not regulated under other areas of the law. And here is the provisions, the basic provisions, which is that no one should have virtual financial assets should issue it to the public in or from Malta unless they are regulated, and that's what the unless is. So unless they are regulated, meaning that it only applies to virtual financial assets. It doesn't cover the other assets. The other assets will be covered in other laws. So that's the tricky part. And the same with exchanges. Only the VFA exchanges are covered by this law, whereas a DLT exchange that does not accept the virtual financial assets, then they are not covered by the virtual financial assets.
DLT 자산에 대해서 여러 가지 종류를 말씀해 주셨는데요. 첫 번째는 가상토큰, 그리고 가상금융자산, 이머니, 금융상품 등이 있습니다. 그래서 이제 벌철 토큰에 대해서 여러 가지 정의를 해주셨는데, 지금 그 벌철 토큰과 또 금융상품과 또 금융 이런 부분에 대해 설명을 해주셨는데, 여기서 중요한 것은 VFA입니다. 그래서 앞에서 나온 금융, 네, 막 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. 네, 그러면은 그래서 그 VFA 익스체인지와 DLT 익스체인지가 다른 점에 대해서 좀 강조를 해야 되는데요. 그 DLT 익스체인지가 조금 더 큰 개념이고요. VFA 굉장히 좀 더 엄격하죠. 그래서 VFA에만 해당하는 그 거래소를 칭할 때 그 VFA 거래소를 사용합니다. 그리고 그 VFA 법안 같은 경우에도 일반적인 다른 DLT 상품에는 적용이 되지 않고요. VFA에만 이 법이 적용된다는 것을 강조드리고 싶습니다.
So these are some of the basic requirements for the VFA issuer. So the issuer being the entity doing the ICO. So it has to be a legal person registered in Malta. So it has to be a Maltese entity. It has to have two directors that jointly cover for each other in terms of control. That's a minimum. You can have 6 directors. You can have 10 directors. So, but at least 2 that are identified, that they don't need to be Maltese. However, they need to show they know Maltese law. They know the Maltese anti-money laundering regulation. That ultimately, those 2 directors are expected that they would be Maltese lawyers or Maltese professionals on the board with others that from the operator. And then the obligation is to have a system auditor which will review the technical side and will issue a certificate that satisfies the authority to issue the license. A VFA agent, which is a licensed service provider, which acts as a acts as an internal supervisor for the VFA Act, meaning they have the responsibility or the obligation to report if the VFA issuer is not following the law. So they are the ones that continuously should keep an eye on the company, making sure they're actually doing what they promised to the investors. And that's the most important thing. We've seen this is what's probably different than other countries. We've seen scandals where someone promises to deliver a website or a game, and once they do the ICO, they never actually deliver. So this is the person that is actually going to recognize it and report that immediately. And then an auditor, that's for accounting purposes, and a money laundering officer, that's the money laundering. In terms of in terms of the requirement, there needs to be a white paper similar to other jurisdictions, which is approved by the authorities. There are guidelines, lengthy guidelines on what the white paper needs to include. There needs to be a verification by an external person that the instrument is actually a virtual financial asset under the law. So these are all external certifications, and the VFA agent needs to issue a certificate of compliance and also confirmation that you're compliant with the money laundering regulations. That's for the VFA issuer.
그래서 이제 VFA 발행자의 요건에 대해서 잠시 설명을 드리겠습니다. 대표는 적어도 2명이어야 된다고 말씀드렸고요. 6명, 10명이 되어도 상관은 없습니다. 그리고 다음과 같은 담당자들을 꼭 있어야 되는데요. 시스템 감사관, VFA 에이전트, 아까 전에도 잠시 말씀을 드렸었는데 이제 잘 그 발행 기관이 잘 법을 준수하고 있는지 보고를 하는 그런 역할을 하는 사람이 VFA 에이전트입니다. 그리고 또 어디터 감사관이고요. 자금세탁 보고 담당관이 있습니다. 그리고 백서를 등록을 하고 또 승인을 해야 하고 또 이제 아까 전에 말씀드렸던 VFA 에이전트는 잘 준수를 하고 있는지 확인을 하고 인증서를 제출해야 합니다.
For the VFA service license holder, this is for the exchange. They need to do this. Not on any service provider. There's a list. There's a whole schedule with a list of type of services that require this license, including the exchange. And these are the requirements. They're basically identical to the issuer, with the exception of the next slide. There is the requirement that this is where I said that the virtual financial asset is being considered similar to a collective investment scheme, because these are the numbers, the share capital requirements under the EU directive, the MiFID directive. That's the share capital requirement for a fund administrator, very similar. So, and in our case, in the case of an exchange, you would need to satisfy class 4 license. So you would need, as an exchange, you need a minimum available capital of 730,000. And this is also one of the major differences from other countries. But it is expected that the European Union is probably going to take the same approach, and ultimately this will become an EU-wide regulatory framework. Good. So here's our example on the ICO, and this should not take too much time, and then we'll take some questions that I think you want to translate.
네, 그 다음에는 그 VFA 서비스 라이선스 보유 업체에 대해서 말씀드리겠는데요. 사실 앞에서 그 VFA 발행 기관과 거의 동일하기 때문에 앞부분을 설명하지 않고 넘어가겠습니다. 그리고 이제 한 가지 다른 점이 있다면 이것이 이제 집단 투자의 개념이기 때문에 이제 등급이 나눠져 있습니다. 그래서 거래소를 운영하기 위해서는 4등급이 돼야 되고 기본적으로 어느 정도의 기초 자금이 있어야 됩니다. 이것이 이제 유럽의 전반적으로 이러한 규제를 채택하게 될 것이라고 생각을 합니다.
Good. Well, in our example, we are going to be just considering a very simple. Of course, these things are not as simple. But an example where where the ICO company is going to issue a token, which will then be used to play games on a platform, on a gaming platform. The tokens would be accepted on a large number of games, so it's not on a specific game. There isn't, and then which would then be developed by the issuer for the funds from the funds collected from the sale of the tokens. So it's a typical scenario that we're seeing on a regular basis. The marketing and customer support would be carried out from the offices in Malta in our example, but the development would be carried out from the developers in here we're saying Korea. But of course they could be anywhere, but that's here I'm just putting a note that we're saying that they are transferable, and so you have to make an assumption they are not virtual tokens, because as we said, if they would fall within the definition of virtual tokens, there is no licensing requirement. So then certain aspects of this might change.
How do you define that difference between the virtual tokens over coins?
So the authorities issued a guideline on the financial instrument test. Now, it's a very detailed guideline, but ultimately there are you may say two criteria, which is transferability, how easy it is to actually transfer it up, so that it can be transferred outside the if it stays within one exchange. If it's only the game that accepts that token, then it's a virtual token, right? Transferability, and if it's possible to get money from it. So there are those two main, and then of course it goes very further. But if you squeeze it down, it's that can it be used on multiple exchanges, and can it be exchanged for multiple? Okay, so this is just what we tried to develop very simply. Of course, there's multiple issues from a tax, from a regulatory, from a corporate perspective. But here in our example, we're saying that the ICO company in Malta. Here we're using a company for the gentleman that was sitting back there, which here we're using a company, but I know in other jurisdictions the people are using foundations, even other setups. Sorry, but in Malta you can use a company. So if you want to use a company, you can, which is the difference, for example, from other jurisdictions where you use a foundation because there is uncertainty on the law, and therefore you're forced to use foundations to limit your risks, and that's why most countries use foundations, because there's it's not, the law is not clear, and therefore you try to avoid risk as a shareholder. In our case, we don't have that; it's regulated, so you can use a company, and you can have coins issued by a Maltese company. We separate in our case here, it's not always. Sometimes the white paper, the development of the asset belongs to the company that issued an ICO, and that is to secure the investors in that sense. If you're going to have an ICO to buy a piece of land, those investors will want to have ownership on that land. The coin holders will want to have ownership on that land, and therefore it would be under the ICO and typically separated in a different entity instead of on the site. But in our case, given that the coins can be used on the website and it's not the ownership of the website that we have considered, then we've put the website on a different platform. And of course, contractually, we would have to have a solid contract where we are able to, where we can force the website to accept the coins. Otherwise, there's not much use. And then the development is done in Korea. Of course, here we are saying that there has to be a payment for the development in Korea, and we are emphasizing the fact that in Malta there has to be substance, there has to be employees, an office, and the what we're calling the marketing and support is in Malta for a variety of reasons. But that's to create real business in Malta. That's what we have done for the ICO. situation. Now here, in terms of tax in Malta, the ICO company would not suffer any tax. The website, and there's no VAT. I don't know how much you're following of VAT, but the European Court of Justice said no VAT on ICOs. The website company, there would be the tax, but of course in the website you have the refund system where the income of the website would be taxed at 5% the income generated in the website. Of course the company in Korea that has the employees in Korea would be fairly taxed in Korea. And on distribution of profits of the structure, there are no withholding tax. So in this case, we believe that this would be probably one of the safer structures to use in this case.
시간 관계상 지금 질문 받지 않습니다. 네.
That's my date, right? I just have 2 minutes on the next slide on that, because I'm almost done with questions at the end. No more questions. Okay. The translation. Good. I'll just show this. This is the exchange. As I said, it's just 2 minutes, but this is the exchange scenario where again the exchange can be as a company. And here we're thinking of Korea, therefore we will need to have an exchange that has a presence in Korea, and that has been placed to be regulated in Korea. The head office, the exchange head office would be in Malta. Again, there needs to be the operational side of the exchange in Malta, where it would be licensed and operating. And again, the development, we're saying that it's being done by a separate company in Korea, that is the technical side. And same as before, the taxes is in Malta there is no tax on the dividends from the subsidiary in Korea. They can flow through without any tax leakage. In Malta, there's the 5% tax on the profit of the exchange, and there are no withholding taxes when you pay profits out of Malta then to the Korean individual or whoever it is that is on top of the structure. And then the developing company is simply taxed in Korea on its profits. Well, thank you very much, and sorry for having taken a bit more than my time.
영역을 멈췄었는데요. 그래서 예를 들어서 이제 ICO 기업이 토큰을 발행을 해서 이 토큰으로 게임을 온라인에서 플레이를 할 수 있도록 하는 것이 목적이라고 했을 경우에, 그래서 이 기업이 이제 토큰을 매각을 해서 이것을 수익으로 플랫폼을 개발합니다. 그러면은 이제 이 토큰을 가지고 다양한 게임을 플레이를 할 수 있죠. 아까 전에 이제 질문 나왔던 것이 토큰과 VFA의 차이가 무엇이냐라고 질문을 해주셨는데요. 아까 전에 이제 또 말씀을 했던 부분이 전부 가이드라인으로 나와 있는 금융 자산에 대한 테스트가 있습니다. 그래서 테스트를 통해서 이것이 토큰인지 혹은 그 VFA인지 이제 기준을 가지고 이제 판단을 할 수 있고요. 그래서 네, 이제 토큰 VFA라면은 라이선스가 필요하지만 벌주얼 토큰 같은 경우는 라이선스 없이 ICO를 진행을 할 수 있습니다. 네, 그것이 이제 말씀하셨던 ICO의 예였고요. 네, 그리고 이제 개발과 같은 경우는 여기서는 예를 한국어로 드러났는데요.
예, 고맙습니다. 예.